Hi, Mike Kennedy with you today, and we're looking at oyster mushrooms from my oyster mushroom bucket. What we're going to do today is we're going to dehydrate mushrooms. So first let's just pick this cluster. There's another little cluster growing next to it. So we're going to cut just this one off. You can see here we have another cluster that's growing. So our first job is going to be to clean these off as much as we can. You can see that they've got some sawdust on them. We can just cut that part off if we want them. Here, let me separate them as much as I can. Now, there's a little more. Just scrape that off. So, now, frankly, I like the stems, so I'm going to use the stems, but I'm going to cut them up finer because they are more fibrous and they're going to take longer to dry. Now you can cut things in thin strips, the actual mushroom top, or you can leave them whole. I think we're going to leave them whole for this demonstration. Now we could have let these grow more, but personally I like mushrooms on the small side sometimes. And plus I wanted to give room for those other ones to grow. So I figured picking these ones a little early isn't going to hurt anything. Now we're using an electrical dehydrator, but the best way to dehydrate mushrooms is the lowest possible temperature. So it would be better to actually just dry them, air dry them with a fan. But we've had persistent damp weather here in Maine. We should be having snow and the air being very dry right now, but we don't. Now the person I got this kit from does all his mushrooms by air drying. So he has a screen, fairly large screen. He lays the mushrooms out in the sun and the air circulates around them. The big thing is to leave space around your mushrooms, no matter how you get dehydrating them. And if you're using a dehydrator, you want to use the lowest possible temperature, which for my machine is 95 degrees. So there we have the first dish. We're going to put the stems on the second one. Now, as I said, the stems are more fibrous. I think they're just as tasty. So what I'm going to do is cut them more into slivers. Then that will give them a chance to dry at about the same time that the other ones are drying, the caps. And you know, if you're going to powder these afterwards, which is kind of what I do a lot of times, you can just cut the caps in slices and it will dry quicker. But I thought I'd do this because sometimes you might want the whole cap to be present in something like a soup or something. So you could put the whole cap in and it will still retain its shape after it's rehydrated. Personally, one of the things I'm finding I enjoy doing is taking the powdered oyster mushroom. I let it sit in some olive oil for a while to kind of absorb the olive oil, and then I cook my eggs in it. And it gives, you know, that way the mushrooms are cooked some, and they're rehydrated with the olive oil. Now, there are some mushrooms that you absolutely have to cook to remove toxins. Okay, oyster mushrooms isn't one of them, but there are indigestible parts of mushrooms, okay? And cooking them makes them digestible. So what can happen sometimes is if you eat a bunch of mushrooms that have indigestible parts in them, some people can get gastric upset, you know, which means an upset stomach. So it's always better to cook them. Like I say, I guess some people eat the cultivated mushrooms raw, but you definitely want to cook anything you find in the wild. And it's just a good idea as far as bacteria and things like that go, or bugs or things. But it's a matter of that there are just indigestible parts. It's kind of like cellulose in wood. We can't digest it. The mushrooms can, but then they turn it into something that's still not quite digestible for us. So cooking renders it digestible, unlike we were to cook cellulose. We just end up with cooked cellulose. We still can't digest it, but it will create a digestible substance out of it. So we have two levels here, and I'm going to bring the top of the dehydrator over for you to see. So here we have this Nesco food dehydrator and jerky maker. Our lowest setting is 95, so that's what we're going to use. And then we're just going to watch it. And I'll take pictures as we go along. Whoops, I forgot one escaped. We're going to watch it as it goes along. That's usually what I do. Sometimes I'll set it up and just let it go overnight. But again, the trick is the lower the temperature, the more flavor of the original mushroom you're going to retain. So again, sun drying or air drying would be best, but it's going to be kind of hard to do in this wet environment we have right now. So we're going to use a dehydrator. So we're going to turn it on and we're going to check back. We're a little less than an hour, but we're just going to take a look and see. And things look pretty much the same. It's going to probably take 8 hours or so at least. Here we are with the final product. You can see that it's cracker dry. Here we are with the final product. You can see that it's cracker dry, which is what they mean by that. You bend it and it breaks. It's not flexible. So the stems and the caps. Now what you can do with them, you can put them in a bag and crush them up to the desired crushiness and powderedness you want. You could also put them in a blender, whatever. But this is a neat way to store mushrooms if you have an excess. And it's also just a nice way to use them in another form, because this way they could go whole in something, or they can go in a powder. Personally, I prefer the oysters dried first. I think it enhances the flavor, concentrates the flavor. So there we go. Drying oyster mushrooms. We had a total of 6 hours plus 4 hours. So we had about 10 hours at 95.